When the dark clouds of war gathered over Europe in 1939, Germany stood at the center of it all. A nation rising from the ashes of defeat in World War I, fueled by anger, pride, and a dangerous vision of power. The German people, suffering from the crushing effects of the Treaty of Versailles and the Great Depression, were desperate for hope, for leadership, for revenge. And into that chaos stepped one man, Adolf Hitler. With fiery speeches and iron promises, he rebuilt a broken nation into a war machine. The Nazi regime rearmed Germany, revived its economy, and ignited a deadly dream of domination. The invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939, was the spark that lit the fire of World War II. Within days, Britain and France declared war on Germany. What followed was a lightning storm of conquest, the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, as tanks, planes, and soldiers swept across Europe with terrifying speed. Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France fell one by one. The swastika flag flew from the Eiffel Tower, and Hitler's power seemed unstoppable. But as Germany grew stronger, its enemies grew desperate. Britain stood alone, its cities bombed nightly, yet never surrendered. Across the ocean, America watched closely, preparing for the moment when it could no longer stay neutral. Meanwhile, in the East, Hitler turned his gaze toward the vast Soviet Union. In June 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. Millions of soldiers crossed into Soviet territory, believing victory would come swiftly. But the Russian winter and the fierce resistance of the Red Army turned the tide. For the first time, the unstoppable German war machine began to break. The Eastern Front became a graveyard for millions, and the dream of total domination began to die in the snow and fire of Stalingrad. Germany's rise and fall during World War II was a story of ambition gone mad, a vision that consumed not only Europe but also Germany itself. The war dragged on as Allied forces united to crush the Nazi Empire from all sides. From the deserts of Africa to the beaches of Normandy, German troops fought desperately, but the end was inevitable. In 1944, D-Day marked the beginning of the final push toward Berlin. By early 1945, German cities lay in ruins, and the once proud Reich was collapsing under the weight of its own destruction. On April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life in a Berlin bunker, refusing to face the defeat he had brought upon his nation. Just days later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The world celebrated the end of the bloodiest war in history, but the scars remained. Millions dead, cities destroyed, families broken, and a world forever changed. The story of Germany in World War II is not just a tale of power and destruction. It's a warning of how pride, hate, and ambition can destroy even the mightiest of nations. If you found this story powerful, like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to EchoingChroniclesYT for more incredible tales from history's echoing past. The war that erupted from Germany's ambitions extended far beyond battlefields. It reached into every home, reshaping the conscience of the modern world. As the Nazi regime spread across Europe, its system of control became horrifyingly efficient. Occupied nations lived under fear, their freedoms stripped, their cultures suppressed, and their people forced to obey orders issued from Berlin. In Poland and Eastern Europe, Jewish communities that had existed for centuries were destroyed. Millions were herded into ghettos, starved, and then transported to concentration camps where death was industrialized. The Holocaust remains the darkest chapter in human history. 6 million Jews and millions of others were systematically murdered. The precision with which this evil was carried out revealed how ideology, when unchallenged, can consume a nation's soul. Yet even in the darkest times, humanity fought back. Resistance movements formed across Europe, in forests, cities, and underground tunnels. In France, the resistance sabotaged trains and relayed secret information to the Allies. In Yugoslavia and Poland, partisans fought brutal guerrilla wars. Inside Germany, small groups of citizens risked everything to speak out. One of the most daring acts was the July 20, 1944 plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. Led by German officers like Klaus von Stauffenberg, it aimed to end the madness and save what was left of the nation. But the plot failed, and thousands were executed. Still, these acts of courage stood as proof that not all Germans followed blindly. Some defied tyranny, even when it meant certain death. The war turned global after 1941, when Germany invaded Soviet Union under Operation Barbarossa, and Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, dragging the United States into the conflict. Now the world was truly at war. On the Eastern Front, the brutality was unimaginable. Entire cities like Leningrad and Stalingrad became symbols of suffering and defiance. German forces advanced deep into Soviet territory, but were eventually trapped by the cold, hunger, and the fierce Soviet resistance. The Battle of Stalingrad marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's ambitions. It was a fight so fierce that entire divisions vanished, and the myth of the invincible German army shattered in the snow.
Meanwhile, in North Africa, Allied forces under General Montgomery and General Eisenhower defeated the German Afrika Korps, led by the skilled Field Marshal Rommel. With the Mediterranean secured, the Allies invaded Italy, forcing Mussolini's fall and dividing German forces further. Then came the day that would change everything. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy in France, facing deadly machine gun fire and impossible odds. Their courage opened the path to liberation. France, Belgium, and the Netherlands were slowly freed from occupation. In the east, Soviet troops pushed toward Berlin with unstoppable momentum. By early 1945, Germany was surrounded, bombed daily, and losing ground on every front. The final days of the Third Reich were a scene of chaos and despair. Hitler, refusing to accept defeat, ordered his generals to fight to the last man. In Berlin, the once proud capital of his empire, civilians hid in cellars as Soviet shells rained down. Food was gone, hope had vanished, and the city burned. On April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life in his bunker. 1 week later, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. But the price was unimaginable. Over 70 million lives lost, cities reduced to ash, and a generation scarred forever. When the guns finally fell silent, the world began to reckon with what had happened. Allied soldiers entering concentration camps were horrified by what they saw: skeletal survivors, mass graves, and the remains of cruelty beyond comprehension. The Nuremberg trials soon followed, bringing Nazi leaders to justice for crimes against humanity. These trials marked the first time in history that global leaders were held accountable before an international court. Justice came slowly, but it came. The trials set the foundation for modern human rights law and a promise that such crimes must never happen again. Post-war Germany was divided in 4 zones, controlled by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. The capital, Berlin, was also split. The division soon deepened as tensions between the Allies turned into a new struggle, the Cold War. Western zones joined to form West Germany, a democratic state backed by America and Europe, while the East became a Soviet-controlled communist nation. Families were split by walls and ideology, most symbolically by the Berlin Wall, built in 1961. Yet both sides shared one truth: the old Germany was gone forever. In the West, recovery began with American aid through the Marshall Plan. Factories were rebuilt, cities rose from rubble, and a new economy was born. By the 1950s, West Germany experienced the Wirtschaftswunder,
the economic miracle, becoming one of the strongest economies in Europe. But this success carried a heavy shadow, the moral weight of remembering and taking responsibility. Schools taught the lessons of the war. Museums and memorials honored the victims, and every generation grew up learning the phrase "nie wieder," which means never again. East Germany's story was different. Under Soviet control, life was tightly monitored, freedom was limited, and escape to the West became a dangerous dream. Still, ordinary people worked, raised families, and waited for change. When the Berlin Wall finally fell in 1989, tears and celebration filled the streets. Germany was reunited the next year, not just as one nation, but as a symbol of reconciliation and rebirth. The wounds of the past took decades to heal, but the spirit of rebuilding and peace prevailed. Today, Germany stands as one of the world's leading democracies, a nation that turned tragedy into transformation. Its cities, once symbols of war, now host memorials and museums dedicated to peace and remembrance. The lessons of World War II remain deeply rooted in its culture, that power without conscience leads to ruin, that silence in the face of evil is deadly, and that rebuilding trust in humanity is the greatest victory of all.